Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Dr. Dean Bushey, Vice President, Global Social Innovation Business Hitachi. Welcome to the podcast, Dean.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
I'm extremely excited to have you here because you're an extremely well-accomplished individual who has great stories and has done great things for this country. So thank you for your service in the United States Air Force.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You served this country for 25 years. Not only did you serve the country doing wonderful things, you did really cool, innovative things. You got to learn about unmanned aircrafts. You flew remote aircrafts. You learned about all cool, fun aerospace stuff. Will you talk about those really cool inventions that you were there on the ground floor, a part of the Air Force, please?
Sure. So right after 2001, when we were looking at Iraqi freedom, the Air Force figured out they needed a way to do long-range reconnaissance. Technology advanced, a lot better sensors, and they also needed to figure out a way to keep the pilots and people out of danger. They got a group of team together of pilots and computer scientists, and I was both at the time, to get together at Nellis and say, all right, we've got these long-range drones, and normally we would send a whole group of people together, 100 people deployed to foreign lands to launch these and fly them via satellite and investigate the enemy. And they said, you know what? Let's get together and figure out if we can actually fly these remotely. Can we actually have a very small group forward? They launch the airplanes and the pilots would be back in Las Vegas or Washington or Dallas or wherever. Can we fly these via satellite? So we got together and we got what we call a half rock, a mini group of 36 people. I took them forward to deployed land. We would launch them. We'd get them to about 5,000 feet. I'd be talking on secure chat with the pilot back in Las Vegas. We would turn off the local transmitters. The airplane would go off autonomously. The pilots back in Las Vegas would pick them up via satellite, military satellite, and fly them via satellite. About 22 or 23 hours later, when the mission was done, they would hand them back to me on the way back to the airport, and I would land them locally.
So the movies are true.
The movies are true. The other thing that was pretty cool about that time period is we started figuring out what else can we put on a drone. Maybe it's not just a camera. Maybe it's not night vision camera. Can we put a smelling sensor so we could figure out what's in the air, what's being produced at that building? Can we put a missile on the airplane? And could we fire a missile and dogfight via long range? The answer is yes. What else can we put on the airplane that could keep people out of harm while using this very valuable asset that can stay airborne for 24 hours?
A military drone could stay airborne for 24 hours?
That's the unclassified number, yes.
Wow. So when you have the pilot, and I believe you were one of those pilots back in Las Vegas at one point, when you bank to go right or bank to go left, is there a delay or is this technology so good it's just like, whoop, instant?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's actually a 3/4 of a second delay. So when I bank right, a little less than a second later, the airplane will blank right. But then it takes a little less than a second for it to get back to me so I can see that the airplane banked right. So round trip, it's about 2 seconds for action to see it on the screen. And that's why you can't really land an airplane remotely when the airplane's thousands and thousands of miles away. That's why you have to have a local group to land the airplanes. But you can still do reconnaissance, do special missions. You can fire missiles long range.
And the pilots have to have a lot of patience, I'm assuming?
The pilots have to be very highly trained, as a matter of fact. So it takes a highly skilled pilot to not have sensory inputs, to understand the mechanics of what's going on, to understand the dynamics. You are teamed up with a sensor operator who has all these multispectral sensors. You act as a team. It requires a special precision.
I remember, if I remember correctly, you said the C-130 Hercules that you flew, or you flew a large aircraft, right?
I flew C-5s, right?
Wow. So when you went to training school to fly a C-5, did the other individuals go to a different specialized school to learn how to fly remote drones? Is it two different schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we started down this path, 1999, 2000, 2001, we were using pilots, mostly fighter pilots, to fly our drones because our drones were going to be armed with missiles and they were going to be in combat. So when you fly a drone, you actually get combat hours. So they were using a bunch of different pilots. The military figured on out about 2004, 2005, 2006 that we could use people who were highly trained just in drones. So we have drone specialty pilots that they will stay in that for their whole career. When they go off, they don't fly fixed wing, they just fly drones. We still mix in some fixed wing pilots, but now it's a mix. But there is a specialty career field for drone pilots only.
And are they coming out of technical universities? Are they coming out? Is it some hobbyist that has a drone that decided, hey, I want to make a career out of this? Where's the Air Force recruiting these individuals?
So most of all the pilots are officers. So they all go through a 4-year degree. They have to go through some kind of commissioning service, whether it's the Academy, ROTC, or Officer Training Corps. Once they get through that, they have to put in their requests for assignments. Obviously, the Air Force has careers all over the place. Some of those who want to go to pilot training, go to pilot training. Some of those who want to go to drone training, go to drone training. It's actually pretty difficult to get to pilot training or drone training. It's very selective, and you have to show that you deserve to go.
It's a privilege. During your time in the Air Force, how did the unmanned technology evolve? I remember there were stories, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, the public source, not an intelligence source, Wall Street Journal, I repeat, that during this Iraqi freedom that Saddam was trying to get PlayStations or something because there was the GPUs of them to fly drones. So we had that. How did it evolve?
Yeah, so that's a pretty good question. So the military, from my perspective, was looking at long-range, large drones, which is really kind of the difference between a military drone and the civilian drones we're using today, those quadcopters or octocopters that you see all over the place. These drones were Predators and Reapers, the very large scale. Now, we had smaller ones that we used in special forces. They would carry them in their backpack. They'd go over the ridge. They'd launch them out of the backpack, and they'd use forward observation. From my perspective, from my seat, it was all about the longer range drones. Obviously, that's got KU band satellite, which is an encrypted military band satellite, highly secure as far as cybersecurity. There were 2 bands, one command and control, one video, very secure.
I love the Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian. It's incredible. And they have some of those drones on display. And when I saw it for the first time, I said, holy cannolis, this thing is big. Like, because they're hanging them from the rafters when you go through. I just have no idea they were that big. It was really incredible, impressive machinery. And then when you look at the consumer civilian side of the house, you see, like you said, the quadcopters, very small. Some launch out of a backpack, but I've never seen anything like I saw in the Air and Space Museum. What are your thoughts on the unmanned commercial market day from a civilian perspective?
I think it's exciting. I was honestly coming out of the military, flying bigger drones. I was like, hey, it's going to be big drones. That's what's going to penetrate the commercial market. And I was absolutely wrong. It's these smaller drones that have all these use cases, whether it's photography. I mean, really, if you look at a drone, it's a platform that holds a sensor. And the sensor is what makes it sexy. Whether it's a camera used in photography, a camera used in mapping, a sensor used to measure the depth of water at a mining facility, looking at the supply lines, what's the congestion on the supply lines, going out and going places where you don't want to go, so maybe high temperature or low temperature, where humans really wouldn't want to fly. The use cases for drones is amazing. The technology is fast increasing.
And the insurance company's doing a lot of, if it's after a flood or a major natural disaster, or if they need to redo your homeowner's insurance and they send it up to see what the quality of your roof is. So there's a lot of really interesting, I would call them positive use cases where people are doing good with the drone, unlike some of the things that we've unfortunately seen in the news. You've got this great military experience. You flew aircraft, and I think pilots are the coolest people. And so you accomplished that. And today, now you're at Hitachi. And when I used to think of Hitachi, I'm like, oh, okay, here's the VCR, DVD company. You make TVs, you make screens. Nope, Hitachi's this incredible conglomerate with who knows how many different businesses inside of it. And you're leading the global social innovation business in North America. How would you describe this business, and what is the mission of Hitachi? Because when reading public reports and statements, it seems like Hitachi is going through this massive transformation towards an ESG company.
I always think of Hitachi as a 110-year-old company, 375,000 people. We have 870 different business units. And traditionally, we have been manufacturing, but recently we've gone to digital innovations. And as you said, it's all ESG, so sustainability and resiliency in the environment. From my perspective in social innovations business here in the Americas for Hitachi, we focus on things and businesses that are good for society, good for the environment, and good for business. And that focuses us on key verticals, which is so exciting to work in, which is EV as a service, the EV value chain. And when I say EV, I mean everything from a manufacturer of an OEM to getting power from the utilities to charging stations. How do you optimize that charge? Once the charger's out there, what are you charging? It is a depot level charging, or is it level 1, level 2, level 3 chargers? Is it an ICE conversion to EVs as far as fleets go? How do you optimize the fleet? How do you optimize the charging? What do you do with the battery afterwards? That's the EV value chain. But we also work on stuff like decarbonization. Data centers produce a lot of carbon. What is the carbon footprint of your advanced mobility systems? We look at equipment as a service. So to be able to play in this sandbox, which is all about good for society, good for environment, and very high tech, it's just a joy every day to come to work.
It's fun because you're completely thinking through the ecosystem. You're saying, okay, charging, you have Acme charging, then you have OEM that's building it, you have lithium miner, cobalt miner, and then you have redwood materials on the recycling with JB Straubel, and those guys are rocking and rolling. A buddy of mine, as a reporter for Automotive News, Pete Bigelow, you listen, shout out there, buddy, and he got to go on a tour of redwood materials, and he said they have factories upon factories of old cell phones and stuff they're going to recycle. He said, I had no idea how much of this stuff's available. So recycling is going to be really interesting as that evolves. You're focused on electric vehicles. The infrastructure bill has passed. What has to be done to ensure the transition to electric vehicles is sustainable and it's not just, hi, we're going to go to EVs because there's a tax incentive, and then when the tax incentive goes away, we're going to say, bye-bye, hello, ICE. What has to be done to say, wait a second, this is a meaningful transition, it's a positive transition, and it's a transition that will benefit our business?
I look at it as 4 pillars, really. So it's society, people. People need to be involved. They need to be educated. They need to be encouraged. I think when we go out and talk to customers, more and more we hear, what is my carbon footprint? Are there other alternatives to transportation? How can I get into EVs? The questions are starting to come. The second pillar would be industry. So companies like Citibank or Hitachi, or companies that are focused on sustainability, conversion to EVs, alternative energies. Those companies will drive industry and drive profits and drive innovation. Then you look at public sector. So we have cities like Orlando, which is committed to converting from gas buses to EV buses. You have other cities like New Orleans or San Francisco that are all committed to convert to EVs. And then the last thing is incentives. So you talked about the federal wall of, I call it the federal wall of money, the wall of money coming to alternative energies. Well, that doesn't happen unless you have a plan in place, you have a community that's ready, you have communities and companies that are involved, you're ready to take advantage of that.
You have to be prepared. You can't just show up there and say, hello, government, we'd like some money. It's not going to work. You have to have a plan of how it's going to be used. How is it going to benefit your residents? You mentioned Orlando Mayor Dyer, Buddy Dyer. He talks a lot about that. What are the economic benefits to the businesses that operate in Orlando? What are the benefits to the residents that live in Orlando and call it home? So I sit here. In a previous role, I served as the co-chair of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force for the city of Beverly Hills. And we run all these crazy scenarios from a planning perspective. If every resident in the city of Beverly Hills decided to turn their air conditioning on full blast and plug in a Tesla, could the grid handle it? And the answer came back, no. And we had to put all these different planning exercises into place, which raises the big question from your planning. Hitachi's doing global planning, but I want to really focus this on America here. Say, for example, 50% of all vehicles in America are electric and they're plugged in at the same time. Is there enough capacity to run air conditioners and charge vehicles? Or are we going to have a problem where, we have rolling blackouts?
I think this transition to a fully electric, even 50% electric vehicle transportation system is going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. And I think if you look at it over the 10 to 15 to 20 year period, where we're going to get there. Remember, you have to do everything from infrastructure charging. You have to have gas stations that are now EV stations. You have to have repair stations. You have to have dealer networks. You have to have fleets that are EVs. All of that's going to take time. It's not pardon the pun here, you're not going to flip a switch and have everything go to electricity. I think we're going to get there. But that's a good point. You cannot just make every car in my neighborhood right now EVs. It would be impactful to the grid, negatively impactful to the grid. That needs to be part of the planning process. Let's take it step by step. First of all, what do you need to do on the front part? You need to plan, and we talked about it just a second ago. So you need some type of company or consulting firm to come in and say, where are you now? Where do you want to go? How many chargers do you want to place? How many chargers do you need? What is the size of your fleet? What is the capacity of the grid? What is the capacity of utilities? And basically get a plan together on how you're going to convert and go to EVs. The second step, I would say, from any prospective fleet owner would be to do a pilot. Okay, great. I understand it's a complex problem. I understand we need to go to EVs. I'm not ready to purchase 100 Rivians. I'm not ready to purchase 100 electric vehicles. Maybe I buy one bus, like Orlando. Let's buy one bus. Let's figure out the charging infrastructure. Let's figure out what impact does that have on my flow? What does that mean to us? Then we need to move into a deployment phase. Okay, they went from 1 to 3. Okay, now I have 3. Do I just buy 3 chargers? Does 3 buses equal 3 chargers? Does 100 buses equal 100 chargers? No, you need to figure out what is the charge requirements, what power requirements do you need, what is the impact on the Orlando utility company as you move forward. That's the rollout phase. And then the last phase, as we get down to that 50% deployment, is the optimized phase. It's not just, we're going to throw power at EVs, when you need to optimize the routes, you need to optimize the delivery, and you need to optimize the charge. How do you know what gets charged? How much do you need to charge each one? What's going to happen along that chain? So it's really a process. And it can be a little bit overwhelming from somebody looking at it from the outside saying, I'm not ready. First step is take a look at it. Get a consultant to come in and say, here's where you are. Here's a basic requirement. Let's get a pilot going.
Optimizing this stuff is brilliant. It seems that it's a software problem. Am I correct that you can put a beautiful, like a software layer on top of all this that can say, okay, let's say instead of Orlando, on average at lunchtime, 1 o'clock, 250,000 EVs plug in. We know this based on data. And then we could balance the load based on that. Is that just a beautiful software layer that's going to live on top of this to help optimize it? Or how will a city or a private business or enterprise achieve that true optimization?
Yeah, there's multiple avenues you can take. I mean, there are some companies like ChargePoint that provides charging software on top of their products that can tell you when you need to charge, which vehicle needs to be charged, which vehicle needs to go out, how much do you need to charge it? And they can even go deeper that says, okay, based on the route schedule for tomorrow, buses A, B, and C need to be charged this much to cover 200 miles. Buses D, E, and F need to be charged this much. But I do think that software layer on top, and I like to call it the EV OS, is going to be paramount. And as we go down this path towards EV and sustainability, that software layer on top that provides compatibility back to the utilities, all the way up to the charge stations, that provides the charge optimization, the fleet optimization, and then, by the way, what do you do with the batteries afterwards? Oh, and by the way, what about all the ancillary apps? Like, how are you going to pay for it? What is the payment system? How are you going to commercialize it? How are you going to notify the passengers of what's going on with their vehicles? All that becomes part of that EV OS software digitization on top.
Payments is the key. We're getting past the stage where there's not enough battery. I don't know if we can do this. Their chargers are becoming readily available. The Tesla supercharging network is absolutely phenomenal. But if you don't have a Tesla, you have to use use a Blink charger, a ChargePoint charger, a Volta charger. And the thing is, you've got to download different apps, put your credit card in. That's a pain. Nobody wants to do that. There's friction there. And then you had a little quiet announcement came out of JP Morgan. They're acquiring 80% of VW's payment business. And in the press release, it said 100% of VW's in-car payment business. I said, okay, Jamie Dimon, the guy and the gentlemen and ladies over there, they're onto something. And then you hear all these rumors out of everybody's favorite device manufacturer out of Cupertino, Apple. It seems to me that if the payments could be cracked, where if you went to charge here or my wife went to charge there, the vehicle already knows. It charges the card on file. You have no friction. That to me seems like that's a valuable thing, because if you look at the credit card industry and charge-offs and fraud, take a look into what happens at the gas station, the amount of fraud. The people, you put the card in, somebody's got one of those little skimmers. Next thing you know, they take your money. But if the wallet's built into the car, you eliminate that fraud. That becomes a big business.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I mean, you look at, you talked about making it frictionless. It's got to be convenient. We all know that you go out there and operate your car. Why do people like to use gas guzzling cars right now? Well, you've got all these gas stations out there. You can pull into any one. You don't have to go to Sunoco. You don't have to go to Texaco. You could buy gas from anywhere, and it's all a single payment system. The same thing's got to happen with EVs. It's got to be really convenient. And to make it inside the car, where you pull your car up, it charges, you get charged based on your account, would be brilliant. So that's one, it's got to be convenient. Two, it's got to be secure. You got to make sure that the information you're putting out there, whether it's the data or your credit card numbers or how you're paying, it's got to be really secure. So that system layer, that layer on top, the security layer on top, has to be in place. And then the last one, it needs to be multimodal. I really think that going from trains, planes to automobiles, to coin a phrase, needs to be seamless among the payment systems. Convenient, seamless, and secure would be my three buckets that this payment system can solve. That's really valuable.
Planes, trains, and automobiles. Gotta give a shout out. He was an incredible comedian with John Candy and Steve Martin as a sidekick. That was a fun movie. If you haven't watched it or you haven't watched it in a while, I highly recommend you watch it, because it's a really funny and you'll laugh and have a good time. And the stressed out world we live in, it's nice to get away for an hour and a half and just flat out laugh. I want to stay on the cyber element. I have a buddy of mine, Brian Hurd. He heads up cybersecurity for Aon Frost Freeburg. Really interesting gentleman. And we started talking, and I said to Brian, I spoke to a music manager friend of mine that manages several large acts. And I said, we're floating this idea. I said, there's a concern that if you're going to a Live Nation shed, so it's going to hold 18,000, 22,000 individuals, and let's say 5, 6, 7, 8,000 of those individuals plug their vehicle into charge when they're at the concert. What happens if a hacker gets in there and locks those vehicles and starts messing with the grid? That becomes a problem. So what can be done from a cybersecurity perspective to ensure that when the electric vehicle is plugged in and charging, that it's secure and that individual does not have to worry about something that would come out of a Hollywood movie?
But one, I think we need to recognize that it's a critical infrastructure piece. If you're plugging into the grid and you're operating a vehicle based on your charge down the highway, it becomes a national safety concern. So one is highlight the fact that this needs to be regulated. Two, there needs to be standards. So if you're going to put your, the Dean Bushey charging system out there on the road, that Dean Bushey charging system needs to have standards that it raises up to. And that needs to be established by experts like you're talking about. And that layer on top needs to be secure on top of the software that exists now. So I think those are the two big ones. One is the recognition that it is critical infrastructure. You're plugging into the grid and you're using the transportation system. And two, it needs to be regulated.
I like that you put on your military hat here and called it a national security issue, because it is a national security issue. And it's something that if we don't deal with it now and get ahead of it, somebody's going to be inspired by a Hollywood movie and you're going to read about it in the newspaper, and it's not going to be fun, and it's going to cost the United States billions and billions of dollars of economic harm. So hopefully we can get ahead of that. And you're right about standards. So let's table that. What are some of the other big obstacles that you see as society moves towards an all-electric future? We have the consumers with Lucids coming out with vehicles, Rivians coming out with vehicles, Mercedes, BMW, all the OEMs, GM, Ford. So that's moving along. You have on the commercial side, BrightDrop is doing really great stuff, which is a GM subsidiary. You have Navistar working on it, Volvo working on it. What obstacles do you see that could trip this all up? And next thing you know, 10 years from now, we're here talking about Chevron and Exxon.
I love the description of the two different buckets. I would call it fleets and personally owned electric vehicles. Those are kind of intertwined, but a little bit different. First of all, I think it needs to be convenient. You need to look at the total cost of ownership from a consumer's perspective. Yes, I'm very concerned about the environment, and yes, I want to go to electric vehicles, but how much of a premium am I going to pay for an electric vehicle? Where are the charging stations? How much does it cost for me to charge? Is it going to be convenient for me to drive to New Orleans to go see my in-laws? Is there a range fear? That's a big concern right now. We're getting away from that. From a fleet perspective, you really got to look at total cost of ownership. I mean, we're oftentimes, from a fleet perspective, you're living on a very thin profit margin. So to do a complete conversion of your ICE vehicles, which may have 10, 15, 20-year lifespan, is not going to happen. So you're going to have a gradual shift to an EV fleet to do your transportation, whether it's last mile, middle mile, or long haul trucking. I think a big concern is one you're already seeing. Supply chain disruption is going to be a big one. You've got to have materials, you've got to have the supplies to not only construct the EVs, but to get the infrastructure in place to make this happen and smoothly. And that's why I really think it's a 15 or 20-year play. As we move down, we're not going to be able to rush this overnight.
I agree with you. And you went on an adventure, and I love adventures, and went out and visited a mine, which I think is really cool. And there's the National Lampoons when he went and visited Hoover Dam, went on the dam tour, but I haven't thought of went on the mine tour. I haven't figured that one out. So that's really interesting. That raises the question. I read a brilliant book called The World for Sale. It's about the global commodities markets. Will EV manufacturers be able to source enough raw materials and commodities to be able to build the batteries that are required to meet the overwhelming demand that these corporations are going to have to do to move to ESG, to move to electric vehicles? Because it's not the board putting pressure on you. It's coming from investors. And when the investor puts the pressure on you, you've got a double, triple, tip-tap-toe go.
Yeah, you brought up two different markets that I really like. One is the battery market. Battery technology is increasing so fast right now. We're talking about maybe vanadium batteries. We're talking about alternatives to lithium-ion batteries. So they're getting smaller. The energy density is going up. How can you pack as much density to get rid of that range fear that we've talked about to get the batteries in place? And then what do you do with the batteries when they're end of life? Do you lease the batteries to the person that buys the EVs and maybe you swap them out? How do you make the charging faster? So I think the battery technology is a big part of the EVs, and I think it's a market that's going to explode. The second part is the only way you can make batteries is if you have the supplies, the minerals, the materials. And it can't be bought offshore, in my opinion. I mean, you can import as much as you want, but at some point, as we saw with COVID, you're going to come up with supply chain issues because it's offshore. So we have to develop internal to the United States supplies of materials and minerals to produce these batteries. And we have to have battery producing capacity to supply the EVs. That's what's going to drive this. They're the engine, right? The battery is the engine to the EVs.
And we also have to have onshore refining of the minerals. Today, 90% of all the raw minerals are refined in China. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, that things are tense. You open up any newspaper and you can see, boy, oh boy, things aren't, hunky-dory. We need onshore refining of the minerals, and we need the ability to develop more mines here. Because if you look at what happened in the Atacama Desert down in Chile, there's a lot of political instability there. We can look in history, and if you want to go back to the early 1900s when we were mining in Mexico and the political instability there with the Zapata and the whole insurrection that happened there, is we have to control our own supply chain. We have to control our own destiny, or the cost of these vehicles are never going to go down, and we're never going to achieve an all-electric future. We're having this really fun conversation about all this wonky stuff in the supply chain, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, I'm an executive at a company that's getting pressure to do this. I want to know, as Mr. Hitachi leading the global social innovation business, what role is Hitachi doing to help, let's call it Acme fleet operator, 10,000, 20,000 vehicle fleet, convert to electric vehicles? Because you understand the entire value system. What are you doing to help those type of customers?
Well, like I said, the first step is consulting. Go to the fleet operator and say, what are your major concerns? And I really think when you go and engage with a customer, the first step is to listen. Oftentimes, you'll see business development people go to a customer and say, you need to buy unit X. And I think that's the wrong approach. So we really take it as a consulting service. Hey, tell us what your operations are. Tell us what your concerns are. Tell us what you're really trying to do. Is it space as a service? You're trying to deliver a number of packages per day? Are you trying to deliver a number of people around the system? first listen to the customer, then guide them through some opportunities to say, okay, now I think I heard you say this. Did I get that right? If I got that right, so now let's talk about costs, opportunities. How are you going to move that direction? Are you going to do a total cost of ownership analysis? We can help you with that. Are you going to look at the charging infrastructure? Do you want to buy source from different providers? Are you going to optimize your fleet operations? It all goes back to understanding the customer's concerns. So is it a fleet operator? Is it a bus operator? Is it a municipality? Is it a private community that's trying to convert to EVs because they know gas is not the way to go? First, understand the customer.
When you look to understand the customer and you identified electric vehicles, the next one is autonomous vehicles. And electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, they go together like peanut butter and jelly. It's going to happen. You have the SAVE coalition with Local Motors, Neuro, and Zoox that's working on the design elements. You were the general manager at Voyage, did really great things in the villages, which is a fun place to visit. And you were at Florida Polytechnic. What are your thoughts on the current state of the autonomous vehicle industry? Do you think that the industry will take, right now, there's some individuals that are all in on EVs, some companies that are all in on hybrid. Will we start to see over the next, you think, 3 to 5 years, a dramatic shift and push towards an all-electric autonomous vehicle future?
That's a great question, kind of a loaded question too, because I think we've all remember 2015, 2016, where we heard this autonomous vehicles are going to be here by 2019. Then we heard 2020, and now we're hearing 2023. I don't think it's a destination. I think it's more of a evolution. Autonomy in vehicles, autonomy in transportation is doing great things, whether it's autonomy in trains, autonomy in long-range trucking, autonomy in last-mile delivery. They are evolving. And I think these companies like Voyage, GM, they're all evolving and making enhancements to their autonomous capabilities that are driving transportation so fast and forward. It's not like if you don't deploy your autonomous vehicles, you haven't succeeded. No, I think each one of the innovations they're making is helping to drive transportation forward. And I think you're right, by the way. Electrification and autonomy go hand in hand. I think we're going to get rid of the hybrid vehicles. We're going to go to all electric fleets, autonomous vehicles. I'm really a fan of long-range trucking, going electrified and autonomous. I think that's a big win. You get it out of the very complex environment. You can go cross-country. You get it on roads that are semi-straight out of the dangerous inner cities. So you take a look at the verticals. There's lots of them. You take a look at the benefits of autonomy. There are lots of them, from safety to reduced need for employment. I think it's great.
Autonomous trucking, I've been loud and louder and louder about it. If you look at the current state of supply chain, autonomous trucking can help shore up a supply chain. It can allow the goods delivered to the grocery store to be cheaper because you're not going to have the labor shortage. It's going to allow Christmas gifts to be there under the table. And then there's going to be jobs created. You're going to have all these new jobs that are going to be created. Oh, autonomy is going to kill jobs. However, if I hear that one more time, I'm going to sit down with a whiteboard and explain all the jobs that it's going to be created, because you just have to talk to Locomation, Too Simple, Kodiak, Embark. They'll show you all the jobs that they're creating and all the jobs that will be created. We have to get over that myth.
Yeah, if you look at the jobs that are being created, they're high value, high salary tech jobs. The way I look at it, if you look at, take a truck that's at Florida, wants to go to Los Angeles. The driver drives it to the port of Florida, it gets loaded up, and they send an autonomous truck across the country. Maybe it stops in Kansas and they do a quick battery swap. The truck can keep moving. Well, wait a minute. Who designed the software? Who maintains the software? Who develops the hardware? Who does the infrastructure? All of those are high-paying tech jobs that are going to be created by that specific industry. Now, when he gets to LA, I don't think it's going to drive inner-city LA, but a driver gets into it. Well, what happens to all the truck drivers? Well, you help them convert to autonomous. Maybe they're monitoring. Maybe they're getting these high-paid tech jobs. I think it's a win-win. Win, like you said, for supply chain, and win for employment.
And it's a win for families, because that individual that, say, picks it up in Ontario, California, which is about an hour and a half, hour 20, minus traffic here, outside of LA, they can go home at night. They can go to their son's baseball game. They can go to their daughter's ballet recital. That's a great quality of life. But then in the software, you're going to have the companies like Goodyear's doing great innovations around tire monitoring. You still need somebody to replace the tires and fix it. we're only scratching the surface on the amount of jobs that are going to be created. Not only is it going to create jobs, it's going to lower the cost of goods, which is going to give everybody in America a giant tax break.
Oh, yeah. And you brought up quality of life for the truck drivers. We already have a problem with employment for the truckers. We're lacking, I don't know what the statistics are, but we are greatly lacking truck drivers. If you give them a better quality of life where they can be home at night, that long range trucking is done by autonomy. I think it's a home run.
It changes the game. And then in inner cities, we're going to have the robo-taxis eventually running around. But I think from an investor standpoint, that autonomous trucking is where the dollars are going to be made. And staying on the investor track here for a minute, there's a giant trend that's not, in my opinion, the media is not covering enough, is the move to developing your own silicon. Apple with the M1, the M1 Max chips, they're cooking. Google is starting to work on their own silicone. And when you read all this stuff, why are they doing it? Low power. Apple's publicly say they're putting them in the laptops because of low power, longer battery life. When do you think we get to a point where that homemade architecture for the silicon will go into these autonomous vehicles where the GPUs aren't sitting there pulling all this power? You'll have custom-made silicon.
I think we're rapidly approaching there. And I think you're right from an investor's perspective. That's another ripe market. I think back to the Chrysler Pacificas when we had the back trunk open. It is full of this big old computer, great computing power. It could do most of the autonomy on its own. It actually did edge computing on its own. It really didn't need a wireless connection until you got back to the garage. But if you could take that power that it draws from the battery that's underneath, and you take the size and you reduce it, now you've made the electric vehicle, the range goes up, the reliability goes up, the computing power goes up. I think that's a ripe market. Now, you said when? That's a tough question.
I'm not going to put a timeline on it, but on that front, years and years ago, I was invited to Mercedes-Benz R&D facility in Sunnyvale in California. They were modifying an S550, and they opened up the trunk. This was in the old days. This thing was loaded to the nines with wiring and compute and all sorts of stuff. And the gentleman who was the CEO at that time, he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, it's a lot of stuff in there." "Wrong. I can't sell this vehicle." I said, "Why not?" "My customer can't put their golf clubs in it. This is unsellable."
All right.
We have to be able to shrink this to enable our customer to put their golf clubs in. It's all those little things that a lot of individuals don't think of, but as for an S550 customer, that is a huge selling point, that your golf clubs fit in the trunk.
We face the same thing in the villages, by the way. Where am I going to put my wheelchair? Where am I going to put my stuff? You blocked out half the vehicle. So I think you're right.
That's where the real world learning comes in, and that's where it's really powerful. We talked about silicon, so you have the silicon, and we both agree at some point, and we're very wisely saying this. We're not putting a timeline on it, but at some point it will come. When do you think, without putting a timeline, that we'll see a big battery breakthrough in autonomous vehicles on the robo-taxi side, where the vehicles can go on like a normal taxi timeline, 12, 14 hours a day without recharging? Do you think that the technology is getting to a point where the battery density that we can allow these vehicles to operate a full shift without having to get recharged?
I think we're rapidly approaching there. You get companies like Auto. We're working with Auto. They actually provide what we call the skateboard. It's a chassis and four corners and four controllers. They provide battery technology. They're battery agnostic, but they can provide their own battery technology. They view it as a battery capacity is increasing at such a rate that what if we just sold you the vehicle and you don't buy the battery and we take care of the battery for you? So the life of the battery kind of goes away. You actually specifically said, what about the charge per day? I think we're getting there rapidly. So what is it right now? We can get like a 300-mile range on a vehicle. That's pretty much going to be all day for somebody traveling around. That's also going to be pretty much all day for a last mile delivery vehicle, which is 160 to 200 mile range, which is what they really need. I think we're almost there. Now, I think battery technology needs to improve, and there's alternate battery technologies coming up, but it's rapidly approaching.
Delivery is going to be electrified. It's just the individual doesn't want the pollution in their backyard, and that's really where that's going to come from. I think you're going to have, on one hand, you're going to have Wall Street pressure from investors, but then you're going to have the mom and pop and the everyday family. I don't want this. I want a clean vehicle in my neighborhood. And so some of these vehicles go on longer routes than others, depending if it's a rural area or if there's a lot of stops or if it's hot with the air conditioning. How can the charge be balanced if the vehicle goes out? It's got EPA say 130, but in real conditions, it's running 90 to 110 and has to go back. How will that depot be optimized from a charging perspective? So vehicle 1 comes in, vehicle 2 comes in. Well, does that go back to the whole conversation earlier where there's a software layer where it knows the different routes? And if so, can that all be automated?
Yeah, they could definitely be automated. There won't be an operator. There will be a monitor of the system, somebody who is reporting and providing dashboards. But that system, that EV on top could say, hey, bus 1, 2, and 3 just came in. Bus 1 is going to go back out on this range. It needs to charge at this station for this amount of time. Bus 2 is going to go out next morning. It gets charged. By the way, the charger won't start until the automation software says the charger needs to start. It's going to be charged optimally when the bus driver comes up the next morning. And you integrate all those. And it's not just how do I optimally charge all the vehicles so they're all fully charged? No, it's optimized based on the required load the next day, which becomes really, really exciting. That optimizes the battery life too.
And then what happens when things are going 1 hour delivery? Does that system just get on shorter time intervals, or do we get to the point where that's where the neuro vehicles and a lot of the smaller vehicle form factors are introduced?
Yeah, I think it's the smaller vehicles, the Neros, or even the micro mobility from a passenger perspective comes into play. Those shorter ranges, you need the last mile, middle mile, long mile, but you also need options for shorter range delivery because it's not going to make sense to take a bigger van out on a very short delivery. I think there's going to be capacity issues. So I think you're right. The different form factors are going to come into play for a fleet operator.
When you look at form factors, I've asked this to Neuro. I said, toilet paper. Can you fit a Costco size toilet paper in the NeuroBot? That's a good question, but that goes back to that. There's a lot of people that everybody needs it, but can that delivery happen? So I think there's a lot of common household items that these form factors are going to have to be built around. And I think that there's the R3 coming. That'll be interesting to see what that looks like. Haven't seen it yet. And then you got great things going with Cruise. They're announcing their delivery intentions. Walmart just continues to innovate on a whole nother level around delivery. They have the Gatik partnership. Gaham, keep doing what you're doing, sir. You're rocking and rolling. And then the one that I keep asking everybody, there's two I ask everybody about, love your opinion on. There's two companies that I really love and admire. They haven't made any inclinations. One is Target and the other is Costco. At some point, do you think that they're going to get into this space?
Oh, I definitely think they're going to in this place. One, let's go back to the use cases. I think some of the use cases are going to have to be explored. What size do we need to put inside a vehicle and how much of a range do we need to make it marketable? I think right now it's kind of I don't want to call it a research project, but right now it's just in the infancy of what form factors do I need? What is maybe I don't need just 3 style of vehicle. Maybe I need a range of vehicles to make it marketable to deliver different routes and different sizes. And you talked about Target, Costco, some of the other big box retail, they're going to get into the electrification and the automated space. It only makes sense based on what we've been talking about today. Super exciting.
And the fun thing, me being me, Target does incredible collaborations. They did the Missoni collaboration. They did the Lilly Pulitzer collaboration. So I can't wait to see when Target does some sort of autonomous delivery collaboration and they partner with a brand. So when it comes to your house, oh, I know that. This is fun. And then it starts. That's a great way to build public trust. I think public trust is one of the biggest elements that we have to get over as we move to electrification and we move to autonomy. And I'm going to go back in history, back to after Charles Lindbergh did the Spirit of St. Louis when he flew across the Atlantic. You're Mr. Aviation here. And I didn't realize there was a gentleman named Harry Guggenheim. And Harry Guggenheim, with the president, that was President Hoover, worked together to fund around the United States trip, the 48 continental United States. Lindbergh went around, did a parade, did a meeting, did a dinner, photo op to build trust that eventually that airplanes would be safe to move passengers, and really built that public trust. And that was an incredible thing. And Kirk Smiley, who wrote the book, The Business of Tomorrow, the story of Harry Guggenheim, he's coming on a podcast later this year. It's a really great story about building public trust because we can learn a lot from history. And Dean, as we look to 2022, what are some of the trends that you're starting to follow? Because when we use a baseball analogy here, we're merely in the top of the first inning of a 9-inning game to where we're going.
I love building the public trust, right? So we talked about cybersecurity. One, we need to make sure that we're not going to be hacked, whether it's our payment system or the electrification or transportation system. Two, I think really it needs to be a public outreach. It's much like what's available, what are the concerns. I think we need to listen to the community, say, hey, we'll have an open forum to say honest communication. We also need to understand that there's going to be hiccups, there's going to be delays, there's going to be an accident. So we need to be ready to say, all right, we understand and we're going to move forward as an industry. So what am I looking forward in 2022? Well, other than being able to travel again, getting outside, moving around, returning to normal, that's going to be a big driver. I mean, I think we're already starting to see everybody getting back to the travel bug, everybody getting back to the delivery bug, which is already going wild, everybody getting back to the new normal. That's the trend that I'm watching. How is that going to drive the markets? How is that going to drive industry? How is that going to drive electrification? What's going to happen with this infrastructure bill? There's so many things that are falling into place right now that are going to drive the industry that it's just super exciting to watch.
And I'm going to go back to aerospace again, because the Wright brothers had accidents. Dulles had accidents. There was a lot of accidents when we were building flight, but it did not stop flight. We kept going forward. And imagine if we gave up after those incidents, the society and the economy wouldn't be where it is today. So it's important that no matter what happens, we never give up. We keep innovating, and we innovate for the betterment of society. And as Hitachi leads this way in this incredible ESG innovation, and I want to point out, this is not a press release or a Band-Aid from Hitachi's standpoint. This is real, and you're doing really good things, and Hitachi's investing in billions of dollars in this space to, I'm going to put it out there, you're trying to green the supply chain, and you're doing a really good job of it. And electric vehicles is just one part of what you're accomplishing at Hitachi. And so my hat's off to you and the entire leadership of Hitachi. And Dean, as we look to wrap up this extremely insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
My takeaway is that we're at the forefront of a revolution in transportation. I really think it's a revolution in transportation. We've been talking about automation, connected vehicles, electric vehicles for a long time, but now the future is here. It's to be part of a company like Hitachi who is thinking about sustainability, the environment, technology, data integration, data enhancements, the entire EV value chain, being able to work with companies such as Hillwood related, Blink, some of those companies who are forward thinking and looking to the future. It's just an exciting time. So, wow, I'm just honored, and thank you for the conversation.
You're welcome. As Dean said, the future's here. And as I say, the future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the future's electric. Dean, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today to share these incredible insights to a world-renowned company.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.